I was halfway through waxing my fishing boat when I heard that dreaded voice slicing through the calm like a rusty nail on glass. "Franklin, that boat doesn't belong here." I turned around, already knowing who it was. Sandra Hemley, HOA president, self-appointed neighborhood tyrant, and the loudest Karen I'd ever met. She stood at the edge of my driveway, arms folded across her pastel cardigan, eyes locked on my 20-foot base boat like it had insulted her personally. "It's in my driveway, Sandra," I said, not even bothering to hide the irritation in my voice. "I'm taking it out on the lake tomorrow." She marched up like she owned the asphalt under her feet. "The HOA bylaws clearly state that motorized recreational vehicles cannot be stored in driveways for more than 6 hours. It's been here since sunrise." I checked my watch. "It's been 5 hours," she scoffed. "We both know you're pushing that clock. I'm issuing a fine. And if it's still here when I do my evening walk, I'll have it towed." I stood up straight. "You're not towing my boat." "You think I won't?" she snapped, pulling a clipboard from a tote bag like it was some kind of judge's gavel. "This community has standards, Franklin. We're not a trailer park." I held back every word I wanted to say. I dealt with Sandra and her little HOA posse before. They once cited me for excessive flag display because I flew a POW/MIA flag under the stars and stripes. Another time, my mailbox post was the wrong shade of brown. She lived to find problems, but this was different. The boat wasn't just some toy, it was part of my weekend routine. My late father and I used to fish together every Saturday. Now I took my son Caleb when I could get him away from video games. That boat had memories, not just a motor. "I'm taking it out tomorrow morning," I repeated. "Then it's going back behind the fence where it always goes." Sandra's lips tightened. "If it's not gone by 8 tonight, I'll handle it myself." She turned and stormed off like she'd just dropped the mic. I watched her go, fists clenched. I knew she didn't have the legal authority, but she thrived on bluffing. And she'd been getting bolder lately. Later that evening, I was double-checking the boat straps when I noticed a guy in an HOA windbreaker walking around my truck, jotting notes. He didn't say a word, just scribbled and left a paper under my windshield wiper. "Violation notice. Immediate removal required, subject to HOA seizure." "Seizure," I laughed, then stopped. Could they actually take it? I spent the next hour digging through the HOA bylaws I'd downloaded when I moved in. Nothing about seizure of property. They could fine, sure, but they couldn't tow anything from private driveways unless it was blocking the street or a safety hazard. I called Lake Patrol. Not the police. Our lake had its own patrol division, kind of like park rangers with boats. I figured if things got stupid tomorrow, I'd want someone official to back me up. The guy I talked to, Officer Deegan, asked a few questions and said, "They have no say over anything on the lake or what you launch as long as your registration's current. HOA rules stop at the shoreline." Perfect. The next morning at 7, I backed the boat out, just like I'd planned. I was halfway down the block when Sandra flagged me down like I was speeding through a school zone. "I told you that boat's not allowed on HOA property." I rolled down the window. "Good news, Sandra. I'm taking it off HOA property. I'll be in the lake in 15 minutes. I've called the towing company. They're meeting us at the dock." My eyebrows shot up. "You're gonna try and tow a boat from the water?" Her jaw twitched, but she didn't back down. "You'll see." I drove off, heart pounding. This was going to be interesting. By the time I pulled into the public boat launch, the sun had just cleared the tree line, casting gold streaks across the water. Mist still hovered over the lake like a blanket being peeled back. I backed the trailer down the ramp with practiced ease and unhooked the winch. As the boat settled into the water, I caught a flash of color in my side mirror. A white SUV with a magnetic HOA emblem on the door came rolling down the access road like it was leading a parade. Sandra was in the passenger seat, her mouth already moving before the vehicle stopped. A younger guy I didn't recognize was driving. Probably one of her new enforcers she'd recruited from the neighborhood Facebook group she ran like a digital dictatorship. I climbed into the boat and started the engine, letting it idle while I secured the gear. Sandra stepped out, heels clicking on the uneven pavement like she was walking into a courtroom. "You are in direct violation of Community Ordinance 12-4, she barked. I put on sunglasses and pretended to scan the horizon. "Funny, I don't see the community out here. You're still within the HOA district. The entrance is less than a mile away." "You ever read a jurisdictional map, Sandra?" I gestured toward the lake. "This water's under state management." "Not your little kingdom." The driver stepped forward holding a clipboard. He couldn't have been older than 25. "We're authorized to impound non-compliant equipment from public property." I raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" He hesitated. Just then, a dark green patrol boat appeared from around the dock. Officer Deegan stood at the helm, sunglasses on, a coffee thermos balanced next to his radio. He pulled up alongside me and tossed a rope to the cleat. "Morning, Franklin." Perfect timing. Deegan turned his attention to the shoreline. "Can I help you folks with something?" Sandra straightened as if she'd been waiting for a spotlight. "Yes." "This man is attempting to launch a prohibited vehicle in violation of our community's bylaws." Deegan didn't blink. "This launch is state-owned. Your bylaws don't apply here." She pressed forward. "He's a homeowner under our jurisdiction. That boat originated from HOA property. And now it's on public water. Unless you've got a court order or a badge, you've got zero standing." The kid with the clipboard looked like he wanted to melt into the pavement. Sandra didn't flinch. "The HOA has retained a private towing service. We'll be removing the trailer and vehicle for non-compliance." Deegan stepped off the patrol boat and walked up the ramp. "Touch his truck and you'll be trespassing. I suggest you reconsider." She opened her mouth, then seemed to think better of it. Her jaw worked, but no sound came out. The enforcer backed toward the SUV. "Have a nice day," Deegan added. I tapped the throttle and eased away from the dock, letting the water carry me toward the open lake. Behind me, Sandra stood frozen, her authority evaporating in the morning sun. By noon, I was anchored in a quiet cove, lines cast. The only sounds the chirp of birds and the tap of water against the hull. I cracked open a soda and leaned back, tension draining with every ripple. But peace didn't last. When I got back to the ramp around 2, the truck was blocked in. A large orange sticker was plastered across the windshield, "Pending property lien." My stomach dropped. Deegan was still on the lake, but I called his office line. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Didn't tow it," I said, "but they vandalized it." He was back at the ramp within 20 minutes. While he took photos of the sticker, I noticed something else. A black sedan was parked across the lot, engine running. A man inside was on the phone, glancing toward us every few seconds. "You recognize him?" I asked. Deegan frowned. "That's a process server." "What?" "Hang tight." Deegan approached the car. There was a short exchange I couldn't hear, then the sedan pulled away. He came back, shaking his head. "That guy was hired by the HOA. They're trying to file a lien through small claims court. They can't do that without due process. They're banking on you not fighting it. If you don't show, they win by default." That night, I dug into the county records and confirmed my suspicion. Sandra had submitted a lien request for ongoing rule violations, citing a manufactured paper trail. The fines dated back 6 months, none of which I had ever received. It was a setup, and a sloppy one. I called my cousin Lindsay. She's a real estate attorney out of Tallahassee. She looked over the filings and whistled. "They forged timestamps," she said. "See this? They used a form that wasn't implemented until after the alleged violation dates. That enough to get it thrown out. More than that, you can countersue for fraudulent filing if you're up for it." I was. Over the next week, Lindsay helped me compile a case. We got certified mail records showing I'd never been properly notified. Security cam footage from my porch confirmed it. I also pulled up HOA meeting minutes, which Sandra had conveniently omitted from the community portal, showing new rule amendments passed without quorum. But the real kicker came from a neighbor, Jorge, who had worked as a contractor for the HOA last year. He brought over a USB drive with internal memos. One of them was a scanned letter from Sandra to the board members, instructing them to create a paper trail for habitual rule breakers to justify escalated enforcement. She'd typed "confidential" across the top like that would protect her. We filed a formal complaint with the state HOA governance board and submitted the evidence to the county judge overseeing small claims. 2 days later, I got a call from a local reporter named Mallory. Word had leaked, and she wanted an interview. "I've heard of power-hungry HOA boards," she said, "but this is something else." "Careful," I replied. "You start digging, you might pull up more than you expected." She laughed, but I wasn't joking. By the end of the month, Sandra's name was making the rounds in local media. The judge dismissed the lien with prejudice, citing deliberate and coordinated misuse of administrative processes. That alone would have been victory enough, but then came the audit. Turns out, Sandra had been rerouting fines into a discretionary account labeled beautification projects. But no such projects had been completed in the last 18 months. No new landscaping, no signage upgrades. Nothing. The HOA treasurer resigned the day the audit began. 2 board members followed. Then came the police. Mallory published an exposé detailing the misappropriation of funds. The article included receipts that never matched invoices, and a quote from Jorge confirming Sandra had paid him in cash for consulting that never occurred. The county sheriff's office opened a formal investigation. Sandra's house was served with a warrant the following week. As she was let out, a crowd of residents gathered on the sidewalk. No one cheered. No one jeered. They just watched as the woman who'd spent years making their lives miserable was driven away in silence. I stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, watching the cruiser disappear down the street. Next morning, I took the boat out again. No one stopped me. 2 weeks after Sandra's arrest, the neighborhood looked different. Not in any physical way, no new paint, no trimmed hedges, but in how people moved. There was a quiet buzz like someone had cracked open a window that had been bolted shut for years. Folks walked slower, talked outside longer. I noticed new faces appearing on porches I hadn't seen occupied in months. One afternoon, I was replacing a cracked tail light on my trailer when a middle-aged man in a faded blue polo wandered up the driveway. He had a clipboard, but it wasn't HOA issued. His gold badge hung from his belt. "A county investigator, Franklin Dwyer?" he asked. I wiped my hands on a rag and nodded. "That's me." "I'm Detective Carl Renshaw, White Collar Division. Mind if I ask you a few questions about your HOA?" I gestured toward the garage. "Sure." "I've got cold tea and a folding chair that's seen better days." He cracked a grin and followed me in. "Did you ever receive any notices that struck you as off, maybe backdated or referencing rules you didn't recognize?" I motioned toward a file box under the bench. "You'll find a whole collection in there. Half of them were time-stamped during hurricane evacuations. Pretty sure I wasn't home when I supposedly acknowledged them." He flipped through a few pages, brows drawing together. "We've been reviewing Sandra Hemley's bank activity. There's evidence of HOA funds being rerouted into a personal trust. She used 3 different vendor aliases to move money from community accounts." "Let me guess," I said. "No actual services rendered." "Correct. One of the vendors was registered under her daughter's name. Another under a suspended contractor's license. We're charging her with embezzlement, fraud, and forgery, but that's just the beginning." He paused, studying my reaction. I leaned forward. "What else?" "We've got statements from former board members. Apparently, Sandra pressured them into signing blank invoices and threatened to fine their households if they refused. One of them was paying double HOA dues for over a year under a made-up penalty system." I sat back, trying to absorb it all. "Any chance she was working alone?" He shook his head. "Highly unlikely. We've issued subpoenas for 3 other board members. 2 are already cooperating. The third one, he skipped town the night of the audit." I frowned. "Who?" "Gregory Wells, treasurer. Know him?" "Barely. Always kept to himself. Drove that old red pickup, right?" Renshaw nodded. That's the one. We traced him to an RV park in Georgia. He's under surveillance. The detective stayed for another hour, asking specific questions about the fine process, board meeting procedures, and any interactions I'd had with Sandra outside of official channels. When he left, I locked the garage and stood in the silence for a moment. The corruption ran deeper than I thought. Later that evening, I walked down to the community dock with Caleb. The sun was dipping low, coloring the water in amber and rose. He leaned on the railing, watching a pair of ducks dive for bugs. "Dad," he said suddenly, "do you think she really thought she owned everything?" I looked out across the water. Some people start with good intentions, then they get a taste of control and it poisons everything. She didn't just want rules, she wanted obedience. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are they going to fix it? The HOA, I mean?" "That depends on who steps up next," and someone did. At the emergency meeting 2 days later, over 70 residents packed into the community center. Folding chairs were pulled from storage, and still, people stood along the walls. For the first time in years, the board table sat empty. A woman named Denise Carter took the floor. She was a retired Navy officer who moved in last spring. Rumor had it Sandra once tried to fine her for using a garden hose during a drought advisory that hadn't been issued by the county. "My name's Denise," she began, voice clear and steady. "I'm not a politician, I'm not a lawyer, but I know a toxic command structure when I see one. And what we've had here is a command system built on fear, not service." There were murmurs of agreement, a few nods. "We need to elect a temporary board tonight," she continued. "We need transparency, term limits, and oversight, no more secret fines, no more vanity projects. And definitely no more HOA accounts with personal debit cards." Someone near the back shouted, "Amen to that." The vote wasn't even close. Denise won as interim president with nearly unanimous support. Within the week, she established a public ledger, posted meeting minutes online, and opened all future decisions to vote by majority. The neighborhood felt like it had turned a corner, but the investigation wasn't over. One morning, I received a certified letter from the county clerk's office. It was a request for testimony. Sandra's legal team had entered a plea of not guilty despite the mountain of evidence. The state was preparing for trial. I met with the prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Eliza Harmon. She laid out the charges: wire fraud, misuse of funds, falsifying legal documents, and obstruction. "She's trying to claim she was misled by the treasurer," Eliza explained, "that she didn't know where the funds were going." "That's bold," I said. "Considering she signed off on every inspection and fine." Eliza smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We intend to prove that, and your records will help." The trial began 3 weeks later in a packed county courtroom. I wasn't the only witness. Jorge testified, so did Denise. Even the former board members, now fully cooperative, took the stand. They described Sandra's intimidation tactics, her manipulation of voting procedures, and the pressure to sign blank forms. When it was my turn, I handed over my full documentation. Photos, notices, email printouts, even audio from a town hall where Sandra had dismissed a resident's question about budget transparency. Eliza leaned on that audio clip hard. The defense squirmed. They tried to paint Sandra as overwhelmed, as someone who tried to do too much. But the paper trail didn't lie, nor did the witnesses. And when Eliza revealed that Sandra had attempted to open a second HOA account under a shell corporation months before the audit, the courtroom went dead silent. The jury deliberated for less than a day, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 6 years 3 in prison, 3 probation with restitution owed to the HOA and affected residents. Her assets were seized, including the trust fund she'd built using community money. That paid for most of the legal fees and returned over $80,000 to the HOA. After the verdict, I stood on the courthouse steps, watching as reporters swarmed Eliza. Denise joined me, arms crossed. "She'll appeal," she said. "Let her. I'm glad you didn't back down." "Wasn't just me," I replied. Took the whole street waking up. She looked out over the parking lot where neighbors were gathering in little groups, still buzzing from the outcome. You ever think about running for the real board? She asked. I chuckled, thought about it, then remembered I like my weekends. Fair enough. A few days later, I took the boat out again, not because I had a point to prove, but because finally I didn't have to. No more threats, no more notices under the windshield. Just the lake, the hum of the motor, and a sky wide open with possibilities. And this time, when I pulled back into the driveway, my neighbors waved, not out of obligation, but because they could. 2 months after the trial, the neighborhood newsletter arrived in mailboxes for the first time in years. Not the glossy, condescending kind Sandra used to send out with pastel borders and passive-aggressive language. This one was typed in plain black ink, stapled in the corner, and written by actual residents. The front page detailed upcoming elections for permanent board seats, a breakdown of community funds, and a short column titled Rebuilding with Integrity. At the bottom, in bold, it read, "Property belongs to the homeowners, not the board members." I folded it up and slipped it into the drawer beside my fishing maps. A few days later, I got a call from Denise while I was topping off my fuel canisters. "There's something you need to see," she said. "Come to the community center. Bring that folder you keep your paperwork in." When I arrived, she was waiting at the back table with a man I hadn't met before. Mid-40s, thinning red hair, county ID badge clipped to his belt. A laptop sat open in front of them with a spreadsheet visible on the screen. "This is Agent Rudd." "He's with the state comptroller's office," Denise said. "He's been going through the HOA's prior financial records." Rudd leaned forward. "We found a second ledger. It was stored on a flash drive hidden in a false bottom drawer in the old treasurer's desk. Someone tipped off county records after the trial. We don't know who, but we're glad they did." I narrowed my eyes. "What makes this one different than the books they already audited?" "It contains off-the-record transactions, not just misused fines or rerouted maintenance funds," he said. "We're talking about false property liens, forged signatures, and in at least 3 cases, homes that were foreclosed on using falsified documents signed by Sandra and Gregory Wells." I felt my chest tighten. They stole people's houses, in effect, yes. The documents were created to simulate long-term non-payment and covenant violations. All 3 families were elderly residents who didn't have legal counsel. They were driven out with threats of escalating fines, then their properties were purchased by a shell LLC. That LLC was traced to Gregory. Denise opened a folder beside her. Inside were photos of the 3 homes, now owned by different people. "One of these houses was flipped and sold for nearly double the price within 6 weeks," she said. I ran my hand along my jaw. "How did no one catch this?" "They used just enough official-looking paperwork to keep it under the radar," Rudd said. "But the forged notary stamps and backdated authorizations don't hold up under scrutiny. We've opened a criminal conspiracy case. Is Gregory still hiding out?" "He resurfaced last week," Rudd said. "Tried to withdraw from an account in Tulsa flagged by the fraud unit. He's in custody now. Extradition's in progress. And the victims? We're working with legal aid to restore rightful ownership. One homeowner's daughter is already working with us to reverse the title transfer. The others will take more time." Denise turned the laptop toward me. "There's an entry here with your name on it, dated 2 years ago. A memo note next to it reads, 'Observe for future acquisition, boat is leverage.'" I stared at it, stunned. "They had a list of targeted properties," Rudd confirmed. "Your fines weren't random, they were conditioning. Create enough of a paper trail and they could argue you were a non-compliant resident. Once the pattern was established, they could escalate." I kept my voice level. "So the boat wasn't the issue, I was." Denise nodded. "You were too visible, too steady. Someone who didn't back down." I leaned back in the chair, "and that made me a threat." Rudd tapped the screen. "You weren't the only one. We're compiling a list of residents who received unusually high fine amounts or were denied appeal hearings." If you're willing, we'd like your help reaching out to them. I'll do it, I said. Send me the names. That afternoon, I visited the first address on the list, a Vietnam vet named Lester who lived in a ranch-style home near the edge of the neighborhood. He answered the door with a cane in one hand and a puzzled look. Told me my foundation was cracking, he said as I showed him the paperwork. Said I had to either repair it or vacate. I didn't have the money. My niece moved me into an apartment across town. They never filed the inspection with the county, I told him. It was fabricated. His eyes watered slightly, but he kept his voice steady. They called it a safety hazard. Said they'd condemn it if I didn't comply. You still own that house, Lester, I said, and we're going to get it back. It took weeks of calls, paperwork, and notarized statements, but with the help of the Legal Aid Foundation, we managed to reverse 2 of the 3 fraudulent foreclosures. The third was more complicated. The property had been sold to a development firm and partially remodeled. That case went federal. Meanwhile, the neighborhood kept changing in small but meaningful ways. The community garden, which Sandra had fenced off and padlocked for renovations years ago, was opened back up. Someone repainted the benches near the playground. The rusted HOA sign near the gate was replaced with a simple wooden post that read, "Welcome home." At the next board meeting, Denise stood at the front of the room, now with real voting authority behind her. I sat near the back, beside Jorge and Lester, who had since moved back into his home. "We're implementing a full transparency policy," Denise announced. "No closed-door meetings, no discretionary accounts, and any enforcement actions require board consensus, not unilateral decisions." There were no objections. She continued, "We've also invited a county liaison to sit in on quarterly audits. Our goal isn't just to correct what's been done, it's to prevent it from happening again." Applause broke out, not polite, not restrained, real applause, the kind that echoed. Afterward, a few neighbors I didn't know by name came over to shake my hand. One of them, a young mechanic named Ray, mentioned he'd been fined repeatedly for parking his service truck in his own driveway. He'd stopped fighting after the second letter, afraid of losing his license. "Didn't think anyone would ever push back," he said. "Sometimes you just need the right storm," I replied. That weekend, Caleb and I hooked up the boat and drove out to the lake. The air was cooler, the water a little choppier, but we didn't mind. He manned the trolling motor while I cast along the reeds. "Think they'll try something like this again?" he asked, reeling in a twitchy sunfish. "Not while people are paying attention," I said, still kinda crazy though. "All that just for control. Some folks don't know who they are unless they're telling someone else what to do." We fished until the sun dipped low, then headed back to the ramp. As I backed the trailer into place, I noticed a woman waiting near the entrance. She wore county clothes, clipboard in hand, but not the kind that made your stomach sink. "You Franklin Dwyer?" she asked as I stepped out. "That's me." She handed me a manila envelope with a stamped seal. "You've been appointed as community liaison for the HOA Oversight Council. County's creating a pilot program and your neighborhood's the first test case." I opened the envelope. Inside was a certificate and a formal letter. The title read, "Resident Accountability Delegate." "I didn't apply for this," I said. She smiled. "You didn't have to." I looked over at Caleb, who was coiling the rope with a practiced hand. "Guess I'm on the hook now," I said. "Only if you want to be," she replied. I glanced back at the lake. The surface was calm again, sunlight catching the ripples like scattered coins. For the first time in years, the water felt like it belonged to all of us. I turned back to the truck. "Guess I do."